Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1155 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. I know that this is technically supposed to be a King Harold flashback, but I don't think anybody in the community is actually looking at that because this was, for all intents and purposes, a Rocks XEBEC chapter. King Harold might as well be a side character. Who predicted that? Couldn't have been me. I said this on Twitter X, and I guess I'll say it here as well. It's just incredible that since Egghead, pretty much, One Piece has not peaked. We're already at the peak, we're on top of the red line, and it just keeps going. It's really starting to feel as though we're in Sabaody or we're in Impel Down, and coming up next is Marineford. But yeah, I suppose I want to start this review here. A question that we had after the last chapter, honestly, I was not expecting a Rocks flashback here in Elbaf, and it begs the question of why exactly did Oda choose to reveal Rocks here and now? Like, of course, we eventually needed to get the reveal, but the placement, is there any purpose in that? Is there anything immediately coming up that would perhaps require us to know some of these things? So there could be any number of answers to this, and it could also just be that Oda felt like he wouldn't have a great opportunity to share some of this stuff at other places. I mean, you can't just throw in a Rocks flashback wherever. There's some amount of interconnectedness it needs with the present story. Harold knowing Rocks and Loki looking up to Rocks provides this opportunity. The possibility exists that this was just a great place, lacking other great places. So we may be thinking too much about it. That is always a possibility, especially with me. But I just want to remind you of a theory that we had pretty early on in Elbaf that might explain this. When it comes to the history of Rocks and knowing all of the details, the character that I would circle as this is most relevant to, aside from Loki, is Blackbeard. I've had myself a suspicion that Blackbeard might find his way into Elbaf. And I feel as though the logic which justifies this is fairly straightforward and easy to understand. Since near the end of Wano, we spent a lot of time following Blackbeard's adventure kind of on the periphery. Oda wants to keep us updated as to what is happening. And if you put all this together, ignoring any crazy thoughts, right? The general simple story being told is Blackbeard is getting closer to being able to find the One Piece. He captured Charlotte Pudding of the three-eyed race, who is supposed to be able to translate the language of the Poneglyphs. She obviously has not displayed this ability yet, but that's what we know about her. That's why we think that she's important. Seems like the straightforward reason why Blackbeard would want her. Then after this, Blackbeard directly engaged with Trafalgar Law, and the end result of this, aside from Law's defeat, is Blackbeard obtained the copies of the Poneglyphs that Law and the Strats had gathered before then. If nothing else, this is a simple solution to save time, right? It would be somewhat difficult to create circumstances for Blackbeard to attack Zou, as an example, and acquire the road Poneglyph rubbing from that country. It's much easier to just steal what the Strats had already gathered. Big Mom's Poneglyph, Zou's Poneglyph, and then finally Wano's Poneglyph. Meaning that by the time that Egghead started, if you consider this to be a race to the One Piece, Blackbeard and Luffy are tied. They each only need one more road Poneglyph to find to be able to determine the location of Laugh-Tale. But in Egghead itself, a low-key reveal I think a lot of people took for granted, but was in fact a reveal, is there's also another race taking place. The race to find the ancient weapons, as well as the means to be able to potentially use them. So the Straw Hats found Poseidon in Fishman Island, that's Shirahoshi. The Straw Hats essentially found Pluton, they know where it is, in Wano. And in Egghead they discovered the Mother Flame, created by Dr. Vegapunk, very likely to be the power source of the energy source necessary in order to use Pluton and potentially Uranus. Maybe this isn't outright stated in the story, right? But the Mother Flame or the Eternal Flame was the energy source of the Ancient Kingdom. The Ancient Kingdom is related to the ancient weapons, obviously, and I think it's very likely that this power source is required for some of their ancient technology. Otherwise, possessing the weapons is useless. So just the same as Oda giving Blackbeard a cheat code to obtain the red Poneglyphs, Through Caribou, he gave Blackbeard a cheat code to find the ancient weapons. There's a reason why Oda is stringing Caribou along in the story. Caribou was there in Fishman Island, discovered that Shirahoshi is Poseidon. Again, Caribou was there at the end of Wano to discover the location of Pluton. Caribou then travels to Egghead, where most likely he learns about the Mother Flame. He turns himself into the Blackbeard pirates in order to divulge this information to them. So both of these races are happening concurrently, and Oda has essentially handled them in exactly the same way. Blackbeard has acquired the majority of this hidden information by cheating. And we're not going to talk about it now, but all of this seems very fitting given conversation related to Davy backfights. Blackbeard channeling his inner Foxy. This is kind of a game with a scoring system, and Blackbeard is not playing by the rules. But as he catches up with Luffy and Luffy's adventure, there's still one thing that he and Luffy have yet to discover. Information related to and the location of Uranus, as well as the final road Poneglyph. Just to me, this seems intentional. Up until now, Blackbeard has not had to directly confront or interact with the Strat pirates in order to steal these things from them. So in my opinion, this last thing, or this last game, will be more so a direct encounter. So where exactly is the final road Poneglyph located? Well, don't think that it takes a genius to deduce that it's here in Elbaf. We actually already know that the last road Poneglyph was originally in Fishman Island. When we went through Roger and Odin's flashback, we can see that it was located right next to the Poneglyph of Apology. It's obviously not there anymore, meaning somebody moved it. So we know that the Roger Pirates knew where the road Poneglyph was, it moved. It seems very likely to me that a Roger Pirate moved it. And the entire point of doing so is to put it in a location it would be more difficult for other people to find, while keeping it findable, especially if you're making friends. Because Roger wanted the right person to find it, I think that Zoe is kind of like the best example of this. Pretty much the ideal place to put a road Poneglyph. You have an island that a log post does not point to, guarded by one of the strongest races in the world, and even if you happen to find this island and conquer the people, it's still not that easy to actually discover where the road Poneglyph is located on the island without the help of the native people. This played out almost exactly with Jack. So the Roger Pirates were looking for a location to hold a road Poneglyph that might be very similar to Zoe, right? The obvious answer is Elbaf. Can't find the Poneglyph just by sneaking into the island and looking around because it is too well hidden. You have to make friends with the giants or potentially the Roger Pirate that is here, Scopper. And of course, conquering the island is not such an easy feat. Also, you really don't even need all this explanation just because intuitively there's not that many arcs left in One Piece, probably. After Elbaf, Lodestar seems pretty likely. Lodestar has its own thing going on related to the Poneglyphs. That's where most people discover that the journey for the Poneglyphs exists, so I doubt that they stuck a road Poneglyph there. And then after that, I would assume it's Laugh-Tale itself. So, you know, unless there's an arc that Oda throws in here that is unexpected, right, this is where the road Poneglyph is. My theory is that Shanks is the one that put it here. I also think that we will eventually find the road Poneglyph within Treasure Tree Adam, because certain things that we've seen make it appear as though the tree might be more hollow than you think, which also works as an excellent comparison to Zoe. But yeah, Shanks told us straight up that he is now going to find the One Piece, and what is the one place or the two places that we know that he stopped? He stopped in Wano, where we know that a road Poneglyph is, and he stopped in Elbaf. Like, it's at this point, it's obvious. Although I promise you, I won't complain if Oda finds a way to give the road Poneglyph to Hachinosu. But let's throw a little bit more logic into this, right? We know that the Poneglyphs are scattered across the world, not just the road Poneglyphs, I'm talking about all of the Poneglyphs. And they tend to be guarded by strong countries or strong peoples that had some connection to or likely friends with Joy Boy. So in my opinion, the Giants are a very obvious choice as protectors of Poneglyph, right? We know this pretty much. But if this wasn't the road Poneglyph, if the road Poneglyph was originally in Fishman Island, then Elbaf had another Poneglyph, the one that they were originally tasked with protecting. Following our conversation here, it would seem very likely to me that the original Poneglyph Elbaf was protecting was the Poneglyph which told you about the location and abilities of the ancient weapon Uranus. So if Blackbeard and Luffy are essentially in a race or playing a game, right? Elbaf is the stage of this final game. The last thing that both of them need likely is here. The only other possibility is that Luffy and crew acquire the information here and then encounter Blackbeard on the sea or in Lodestar and fight over it. But maybe this is my own personal bias, but I just don't like the thought of Blackbeard never finding any of these poneglyphs himself and stealing them from everyone. But yeah, I suppose believe what you want to here. I guess Blackbeard just could steal them all and never find them. Regardless, I think that there's a compelling argument for why Blackbeard might show up here. So getting the Rocks flashback right now could end up being immediately relevant. But yeah, another thing that I just really like is I like the generational parallels. Inherited will is a very real thing in One Piece. In this chapter, we learn that Rocks wanted to recruit King Harold to his crew. There's a relationship there, and Loki is kind of observing. So Rocks desired the King of the Giants on his crew, and Blackbeard, I would think, has most likely inherited this will in some form or fashion. Don't you think that an interaction between Loki and Blackbeard as the offsprings of this failed union, isn't that interesting? I think so. I think that would make a lot of sense. Not necessarily that Loki will join Blackbeard's crew, but the idea of it, the fight for giants as Nakama. The reality based on what we've learned is that Loki always wanted to be a member of Rock's crew. Now you have Rock's literal child, and this is possible. Even if it ends up being a parallel to what happened before and Loki ultimately rejects Blackbeard. Like honestly, from Harold's whole flashback, right? There was a legitimate future where the King Harold that we got is not what happened. Essentially, the idea is that love changed him. And I think that love has the potential to change Loki as well in a similar way. Seeing that literally play out with Loki being faced with similar decisions would only embellish what I feel like Oda is trying to communicate. And all of this conversation I feel like is relevant from the very start of this chapter. We begin where the last chapter left off, with Loki encountering Rocks after his attempted fall. It is literally spelled out to us that Loki chose death because he no longer believed in love. Well, I guess he chose death unsuccessfully, but you get it. For me, this clearly establishes one of the primary differences between Blackbeard and Luffy philosophically. Choosing to side with Luffy is choosing love, where Blackbeard represents something like power absent love. So Rocks is looking for Harold, but Harold is not here. So Rocks is like, hey, go and tell your village to get your father here ASAP. It's urgent. Tell them that you're seriously hurt. And Loki's immediate reaction to this is, you expect my father to come here because I'm hurt? And he says that because he doesn't believe in love, and he doesn't really believe that his father loves him, which is sad. But fair given that Harold is not really in his life. But yeah, basically Loki's like, you know what? I don't think that I will. and so Rocks literally hurt him. But all this is part of something like a debate or an argument, right? Like Loki has the potential of being persuaded that love is real, although he doesn't currently believe. There's some ideological combat taking place, although nobody seems to be overtly aware of it. So we get a tiny panel that was genuinely super impactful that he honestly couldn't believe it, that he was hurt and that his father actually did come to check on him. As they say, winning the battle does not necessarily mean you're winning the war. So Loki is there observing King Harold and Rock's interaction, and it's just obvious that Loki sees a bit of himself in the Rock's pirates. It is genuinely ironic, and I think 100% intentional on Oda's part, that King Harold represents love and connection, interconnectedness, right? But he spares none of this for the Rock's pirates. He's immediately judgmental of them and immediately rejects them. So King Harold showing up for Loki's sake is a point towards love being real. And again, Harold doesn't realize this, but he almost immediately contradicts this with the way that he engaged with the Rock's pirates. Because Harold's love has conditions. Honestly, guys, this is something that I think about quite a lot. You know, like you like to believe that someone can love you unconditionally. People often talk about that regarding family, right? But I think that there are some very understandable things which might test this. Like as in a very extreme example, what if you were a murderer? What if you were a serial killer? Would you really expect unconditional love to survive that? not in the vast majority of cases. Or maybe an example that would be more realistic or applicable to a lot of people is sexuality. People love the idea of unconditional love and family, but evidence exists throughout history that, not always. So this is kind of what Loki is struggling with. Obviously not his sexuality, right? But he has just been rejected for his entire life. So I think that he sees, perhaps better than most, the conditions of love. And I think that this works especially well with somebody like Loki, who very clearly has a powerful will and a very powerful identity. Does he want to become something that he's not just so that everyone else loves him? That would be giving in to the will of everybody else. In my opinion, Loki is less likely to do this than most other people. He's angry, probably for legitimate reasons, and has absolutely no intention of acting otherwise, which is a kind of honesty I can appreciate. Although being angry all the time, generally speaking, makes you a pretty unlikable person. So the feedback loop is there. So this is what I think that Loki found so appealing in the Rock's pirates. Harold immediately rejected them and the idea of forming bonds with them because they're lawless. I'll preach love, but not if you're a criminal. Even though Rock's stated goal is something that is good. He wants to defeat the bad guys. Why in the world would that be a bad thing? Loki's sitting there listening to the conversation and he's probably thinking to himself, wow, he just like me for real. Except Rox is rejected because he's a criminal, and Loki is rejected because he is a cursed child. But ultimately, I do think that they both have good hearts and want to do what's right. I've kind of glossed over the details here, but it's just readily apparent that Rox is not an entirely bad guy. He could have seriously harmed Loki. He really didn't. He does what's necessary, and he doesn't seem to care what other people think. Straight up, it's pretty easy to imagine that Loki thinks that Rox is a guy that should be loved. The fact that they aren't only illustrates how limited love is as a means to change the world. Rox doesn't need it, and he's somebody who actually has the potential to create change. Which is absolutely incredible writing given that we essentially know, right, that Harold represents something closer to where the story actually goes and what it is that we should actually believe in. Villains having compelling motivations and philosophies is what I crave. All the while within the subtext, you realize that King Harold and XEBEC want the same thing. Just a question of how you obtain it. But yeah, it should go without saying. I'm going to say it anyway, though, because that's just what I do. But, you know, Rox didn't succeed in changing the world, right? And why didn't he? The answer would tell you a lot. He was forgotten. Even his surviving crew members don't bother talking about him because he wasn't loved. Luffy in the same circumstance as Rox in God Valley, like an ally, a friend that he'd made along the adventure would have arrived in a timely manner, you know? Or maybe the Rox pirates started infighting because the way that the crew was assembled was just wrong. Basically, the narrative that Oda has painstakingly crafted is that changing the world is not easy. And even if you were to accomplish it, right, it's not going to lead to sustainable change for the better. But even beyond that, there is so much working against making the world a better place. And Luffy is like a once in a 3,000 year person. But yeah, I may or may not be able to express this, but this whole conversation with Loki listening in is just what I love about One Piece. There's so much depth here. If it were me, I would find it pretty easy to follow Rox after this conversation and not King Harold. But yeah, I know that we're rambling as per usual, but I just want to make sure that I express myself fully. Because taking some of this conversation out of context, you know, it could, like, is JB evil? The problem with Rock's philosophy of just using power to change the world as you see fit is such a thing is not sustainable. Yes, you can change the world. And yes, you could potentially, at least for a short time, make the world better. But without love, the cycle repeats. The world is subject to the whims of whoever happens to be the most powerful. While at the same time, power corrupts. Like, I guess Rox just has a very short-sighted view of what he wants, right? He wants to change the world. He believes that in order to accomplish this, he needs to become the king of the world. But even if you look at this with like a glass half full mentality, right? Let's just say that Rox, as king of the world, is the greatest king that you can imagine. But what happens after you accomplish this? Look forward to the next decades, centuries. What happens? Whatever good that Rox does will most likely be undone very quickly. Rox will eventually die and get replaced. Or And if you really want to get into the realm of tinfoil, right, let's say that Rox acquires immortality like Emu, most likely time itself will have an effect on Rox's mentality of life, make him progressively even more evil and uncaring to the lives of others. So in my opinion, as Oda tackles this big question in the story of One Piece, he's trying to think about it in a different way. If you want the world to sustainably become a better place, love needs to be your core philosophy. Because through love and interconnectedness, it becomes much more difficult for us to harm each other in whatever way that might be. Maybe the way that I phrased all this is really clumsy. If so, I apologize, but I hope you generally get what I'm trying to say. It always comes back to the conversation about Near Joy Boys. Luffy is the real Slim Shadys, and all these other Slim Shadys are just imitating. They might just be the next best thing, but not quite me. As Oda is creating all of these characters, he is very purposefully taking certain elements away from them so that they can't do what Luffy will do. I know that I bring this up often, but every time I think about it, it truly blows my mind. You don't understand how difficult this is. But of course, you can take this conversation and then apply it to Blackbeard. Right now, I'm of the opinion that Blackbeard is not quite the same as Rox, even if he's been influenced by him. I'm of the opinion right now, obviously subject to change, but like calling Rox a hero or a do-gooder might be accurate. I truly think that he is trying to make the world a better place on purpose. That is literally his goal. And that's what makes Rox such an interesting character to read about more than anything. He doesn't seem very angry to me. It doesn't seem like revenge is directly motivating him. Personality-wise, there is a lot of similarity between Rox and Luffy. The only thing that really seems to have changed is his desire and ability to make friends. Like for real, that could literally be it. That is the only difference between Luffy and Rox from a character creation standpoint. Honestly, I think that Blackbeard is probably like a combination of Rox and Loki. I think that when we truly get to know him, he will be somewhere in the middle. And maybe this subtle change will allow Blackbeard to potentially have a greater ability to change the world than Rox, although not necessarily for the better. But yeah, we skipped over so much stuff to try to make this conversation cohesive. We also learned in this chapter that Rox was an expert swordsman, a master swordsman. There was a lot of conversation beforehand about what devil fruit Rox would have, and I think that a lot of people, even myself included, just assumed that he had to have a devil fruit, right? At this point, I am extremely skeptical. And although I'm somewhat surprised, I feel like we really shouldn't be, right? Like, did Roger have a devil fruit? No. Did Rayleigh have a devil fruit? No. Does Scopper have a devil fruit? No. Does Garp have a devil fruit? No. Excluding members of Rock's crew itself, Oda's been very consistent about the top tiers of that generation. So it kind of works for Rox to not have a fruit as well. And as we say all of this, I just want you to keep in mind Shanks and Mihawk, right? About love, friends, etc., right? All of this, it seems to be paralleled with that as well. I know all the Mihawk agenda fans will come at me, but Shanks has clearly surpassed Mihawk, if not in individual strength, certainly in effect and ability to change the world, in large part because Mihawk chose to be isolated. All of this is very relevant to what might happen in the flashback next. It's very probable that Rox loses because he doesn't have real Nakama. The guy who ultimately won in God Valley is Roger. But the reason that I'm bringing this up is I think a legitimate question to ask right now is was Rox the world's strongest swordsman at the time of God Valley? That's possible, but he lost, which kind of by nature devalues the idea of the world's strongest swordsman. Even if Roger and Rox were similar, perhaps Rox a little bit stronger, at the end it doesn't matter if you don't have a crew that has your back. I understand that all of this might be construed as Mihawk slander, but it is what it is. The only reason why Mihawk is the world's strongest swordsman today, the only reason he holds this title, is because Shanks let him have it. Sorry, not sorry. If Shanks really wanted it, he and his crew would have defeated and killed Mihawk. So I guess I'm of the opinion that 40 years ago, Rox was the world's strongest swordsman, and by circumstance or fate or whatever, Roger just couldn't let him have it. Or maybe Rox is a version of Mihawk that was a little bit too ambitious, and rather than escape to paradise on your little tiny boat, right, he actually tried to do more, and it backfired. Man, I really was not prepared to unleash all of this Mihawk slander. The dislike bar is going to be wild. But I suppose I will say this before we move on. Just because Rox is a master swordsman does not necessarily mean that he does not have a devil fruit. I just am of the opinion that he doesn't. And beyond what I've already said, I also like this thought because I'm starting to think of Blackbeard as like, let me try to recreate Rox's adventure and then fix what he did wrong. If he didn't have a devil fruit, then acquiring the world's strongest devil fruit could definitely be on that list of like things that could be improved. But yeah, from here, we got some incredible fan service. Like, my God. So Rox attacked the Reverie for some reason. He kidnapped 5 kings and tried to extort Emu, who he seemed to know existed, which how he acquired that information, like, there's like, we're in a pseudo Rox flashback, but there is still so much I feel like we need to learn. But yeah, I can't help but be reminded that one of Blackbeard's goal is actually to become a king within the world government. I know that's not his end goal, but that's one of his current objectives. And with Rox knowing about Emu somehow and attacking the Reverie, I'm of the impression Rox could be a noble. I just have a strong feeling that Rox is nobility, and potentially his kingdom was attacked or destroyed by Emu, and he discovered this somehow. Like, this could be a story that might remind you of Orochi. Remember, Orochi's family back in the day was like one of the major families in Wano. It would also be incredibly fitting to me if Rox, and therefore Blackbeard, are celestial dragons. I know the D initial kind of makes this a little bit more complicated than it would be otherwise, but in my brain, it's feasible. But yeah, we get taken to the Reverie, and Rox is literally in the flower room with Emu. The panel where he's just casually relaxed, sitting there, goes so hard. And just the fact that Rox clearly had some kind of plan. He captured kings and tried to extort Emu, and then it didn't work, and how casually he took all of that, just incredible. Totally unconcerned that his plan did not work. After that, he's just like, you know what, this might be a bit too much for me right now. I'm just gonna leave. And then he literally just left. And then he killed an admiral on his way out. Unmatched feats. But yeah, I know that we're talking about Blackbeard a lot, but a lot of this should actually remind you of Blackbeard. First off, the way that Rox approached this encounter with Emu is very similar to how Blackbeard approached Marineford. When the time comes to leave, then let's leave. And also, I think that it tells you a lot that Rox's plan was to take kings and extort the world government or Emu, and then it seems like he discovered here, oh wow, these kings really aren't that valuable. So in present day, Blackbeard is doing something similar, but instead, he's trying to use Kobe or Garp. Maybe because he learned where Rox failed and realized, look, taking kings is pointless, but a guy like Kobe, a hero to the Marines, or Garp, you know, that has more value. That might move the needle with Emu. We'll come back to the Davy Jones thing in a moment. But Davy Jones was mentioned, and there's things that we have to talk about. So yeah, Rox does all these things and eventually leaves Mary Joie, but the setup of all of this was so incredibly good, because on the way out, he encountered Harold. And Harold immediately realized that this was the guy that was causing all the chaos that he was being blamed for. So they fight. Just an absolute masterclass of compelling power scaling narrative. Is that a thing? Power scaling narrative? Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but that's effectively what's going on here, right? You give Rox all these crazy, otherworldly feats, and then immediately you have him confront Harold, and you realize Harold and Rox are very similar, maybe they're even equals. I guess I'll backtrack on that just a little bit, because Rox did just defeat an admiral, so he might have been weaker or tired or anything like that, but still, like, masterclass on power scaling. And all of this to set up Rox's interest in Harold, leading to him visiting Elbap and everything that happened afterwards. Just, you know, it seems simple, you know, but Oda covered so much ground with not that many panels. Brilliant. But yeah, while we're here, we're not going to talk too much about Rox's crew, but it's only because I really don't think that I can add anything that you don't already know. It's just very clear that this crew is dysfunctional, and it's dysfunctional because of the way that Rox recruited them. He recruited them utilizing Davy back fights, which, as a side note, is another theory dub that we're taking this week. But yeah, I sincerely hope that in the next chapter we continue with Rox's adventure. I'm not entirely certain that we will, because this is supposed to be a Harold flashback, not a Rox flashback, so it legitimately could stop here. But if we do continue the flashback, then probably we'll find more time to talk about Rox's crew in, like, specifically. I just want you to know that I'm enjoying all of this. All the character interactions were just crazy interesting. I can already tell you that Shiki is the biggest problem child here. There is no doubt in my mind that Shiki stabbed Rocks in the back in God Valley. He absolutely did that. Also, Wang Zi was not what I was expecting. So you're telling me that that guy ends up becoming the boss of Hachinosu for the next 40 years? And it's big news when Kobe and Blackbeard, etc. defeat him? I can see why Oda off-screened it. But yeah, guys, finally, the last thing that we have to talk about is Davy Jones, and I'm certain related to all of this is Davy back fights. I'm not certain how much I want to say here, like, should I just save my thoughts and make a video? I know that I haven't been the best at making videos, but I might be more motivated if I save my thoughts here, so I don't feel like I'm constantly repeating myself. Let me try to strike a balance. It's very obvious that as Oda was creating One Piece, he intended to use actual pirate mythology, lore, actual history to construct some things regarding the story. And if you're utilizing pirate lore, then Davy Jones just makes too much sense. I know that I talk about this a lot, but a lot of my theories about the future of One Piece have to do with the cycle of life and death. And so for us to focus on Davy Jones here, it works way too well with this, because that is essentially what Davy Jones is. This is the pirate afterlife mythology. The story is that when sailors die at sea, their soul is taken to Davy Jones' locker. Davy Jones is kind of similar to the devil, although it may not be that simple. But yeah, if I had to express my theory about One Piece in the fewest possible words, I think that the cycle of life and death in the world of One Piece is broken. Devil Fruit may have a lot to do with that. So I think that the story of Davy Jones, who was at some point in the past an actual person, relates to the cycle of life and death being broken in One Piece. I kind of feel like you either understand what I just said or you don't. But we're not going to explain it fully here. It would just take way too much time. If you can't tell, I'm struggling. But yeah, I feel like reading this chapter, the theory that most of the community has come to or will come to is that Davy Jones might be the actual name of Joy Boy. Because hopefully that guy is not literally named Joy Boy by his parents, because if so, that's cruelty. So I want y'all to know that I recognize this possibility. Also, I recognize that this is the intuitive thought to have right now, which probably makes this the most likely thing right now. Emu talks about Davy Jonesian pirates, right? So Davy Jones was likely a pirate. We also have Davy back fights, a thing that in the current world pirates do. And we know that Joy Boy was the first pirate. That's what's said. So therefore, it seems likely that Davy Jones is Joy Boy. So if this is what you think, all love and respect, sincerely. But being the contrarian that I normally am, my thoughts are different. But it is incredibly difficult to attempt to explain what it is that I think and why. But long story short, I'm of the opinion that Davy Jones was a character that existed approximately 3,000 years ago. This guy is involved in the story from the literal very beginning, the First Age. It's his story that Joy Boy attempted but failed to fulfill, and that Luffy will ultimately bring to its end. If you want to think about the Harley text, they will never meet again. I think that they, or one of the they, is Davy Jones. His soul is effectively trapped in purgatory. In my opinion, being a Davy Jonesian pirate is about freeing Davy Jones. And accomplishing this will heal the entire world of One Piece, because the cycle of life and death is broken. But yeah, if this made even like the tiniest amount of sense, I consider that to be a dub, and this is a video that I have to make. I want you to yell at me. But it goes without saying that this is another incredible chapter of One Piece, and we're living in the best of times. If you're interested, check out my book, The Booms. Link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.